The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
The palace did not tremble because of a speech, a scandalous interview, or a public insult. It trembled because of one confirmed breach inside the machinery of monarchy. A private protocol line had been crossed, and Prince William did not respond with anger alone. He responded with action. By nightfall, Meghan's name was being reviewed inside royal records, and the silence around the decision became more frightening than the decision itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William sat alone behind a closed door, reading the final protocol memo twice, as if the second reading might soften what the first had made clear. Palace Protocol, the rules controlling who may access private royal information and how formal duties are handled, had not merely been bent, it had been broken. Meghan's active ceremonial listing, the internal record connecting her to invitations and recognition, had been flagged after unauthorized access to a restricted royal communication file was confirmed. The prince placed one hand flat on the desk and did not move. He understood the weight of that file because royal records are not simple public biographies. They are the hidden map of who belongs where, who receives what, and who can still move through the palace system with old privileges attached. Meghan's name carried history, but now it also carried risk. For William, a family name had become a security question. Meghan did not stand in that room, yet her presence pressed against every line of the memo. She had spent years arguing that the palace closed doors too easily, and now the palace was preparing to close one with permanent force. A senior courtier later confirmed through a documented internal account that the breach was not treated as an accident. The courtier noted that a restricted file had been opened through a channel that should have been sealed to non-working royals. William did not ask for a warning letter. He asked for the records review immediately. That choice told aides the future king no longer saw this as a misunderstanding, repaired by careful language. He saw it as a boundary test. Catherine would feel the strain in his silence, and Catherine would know the decision had wounded him. Charles would face the consequence of a decision his son made first, and the king would know the palace had crossed into harsher ground. This was not only about Meghan, it was about William, Catherine, Charles, and the future shape of the monarchy. Once the names inside the room became clear, the removal stopped looking like a procedure and began to feel like a family rupture dressed in official language. Every royal crisis has a public face and a private wound. This one had both. William carried the burden of future kingship. Meghan carried the weight of exile and defiance. Catherine stood at the edge of a family already bruised by pressure. Charles watched a son make a decision that he himself had avoided for years. And inside that circle, every emotion had a consequence. William did not move like a man chasing revenge. He moved like a man who had finally accepted that the future royal household, the working family structure that would one day operate under his leadership, could not be built on cracked trust. The prince knew every signature would be judged, every silence would be studied, and every delay would look like fear. Meghan, meanwhile, stood at the center of a different wound. She had already lived outside the palace walls, but this decision suggested something colder. Distance was no longer enough for the institution. Catherine entered his office after the memo had been signed, and she knew before he spoke. The princess saw it in his face, in the way he kept his hand near the closed folder, as if touching it again might make the decision feel less final. She did not ask whether he was certain. Catherine understood certainty could still hurt. William looked at her only briefly, and that small pause carried more weight than any speech. He had protected the system, but the system had taken something from him in return. Meghan's name sat inside the palace file like a spark left too close to old paper. She had become more than a person in that room. She had become a test of whether broken channels could remain open because of history, sympathy, or fear of public reaction. A private aide later revealed through a documented staff account that the breach did not cause panic because it exposed one secret. It caused alarm because it proved old access pathways had not been fully closed. Charles read the file with the quiet grief of a father who knew too much had been left unresolved. The king was not triumphant. He was tired. He saw William doing what he had postponed, and that recognition cut deeply. The monarch understood why the ceremonial listing, an internal palace entry used to guide formal invitations and recognition, mattered. If Meghan's listing remained untouched after a confirmed breach, protocol would look optional. The silence hardened around them. William had made the decision. Catherine had seen the cost. Meghan had become the symbol of a boundary finally enforced. Charles had accepted that the monarchy could not keep surviving on unfinished compromises. To understand why the prince moved so decisively, the story must go back to the hidden trigger that turned unease into irreversible action. Long before the order was signed, there was a moment almost no one outside the palace understood. It was not a banquet, not a balcony appearance, not a public argument. It was a private Windsor coordination call, arranged to discuss a memorial seating plan. One voice asked for more access than protocol allowed. One aide refused. And from that refusal, the entire crisis began to move toward impact. Meghan joined the Windsor Memorial Coordination Call expecting answers, not resistance. The call, arranged to settle a closed family memorial, brought together aides, schedule officers, and household representatives whose job was to manage who attended, where they sat, and what private details they were allowed to receive. A memorial seating plan is the palace's internal guide for arranging family places at a service, and in this case, it carried more than chairs. It carried rank, recognition, and emotional meaning. Meghan pressed for access to the restricted royal communication file connected to ceremonial attendance and family correspondence permissions. Her voice stayed controlled, but the tension underneath it sharpened every word. She argued that being denied clarity only created public embarrassment later, and Meghan insisted she should not be left outside decisions that affected her place in the family. The aide on the line refused. Not rudely, not loudly, just firmly, and that firmness cut deeper than an insult. William heard the account later from a senior aide through a documented palace briefing note, and the prince went completely still. He did not react because Meghan had asked questions. Questions could be handled. Hurt feelings could be managed. What chilled him was the channel she used. It should no longer have been active. It should have been closed when working ties were severed. Yet somehow, the old root still breathed beneath the surface. The breach came after that call. In the follow-up, no one expected to matter. A restricted file was opened briefly through an outdated palace permission route, and that single access attempt changed the entire meaning of the earlier conversation. William understood the danger at once. This was not just about one file. It was about whether the palace had left an unlocked door inside its own memory, a door tied to Meghan's old ceremonial reference. The forgotten loophole became the explosive detail. Her listing had never been fully deactivated, which meant the system still carried a trace of recognition the family no longer trusted. Meghan had wanted clarity. William saw vulnerability. The aide had refused a request. The prince now saw proof that refusal had not been enough. The hidden call had exposed the weakness, but the confrontation would expose the pain behind it. There are moments when royal language becomes too polished to hide the truth. This was one of them. The meeting was private, the door was closed, and no aide was allowed to soften the air. William did not raise his voice at first. Meghan did not lower hers. Between them stood years of accusation, distance, pride, and one breach that neither side could explain away. William entered the private palace sitting room with the records file already marked for review. A sitting room is a smaller formal room used for private royal conversations, and this one mattered because it kept the confrontation away from staff, cameras, and soft public language. The prince had demanded direct clarity after the confirmed protocol breach, and Meghan arrived expecting a warning. Instead, she saw the file. She understood at once that this was not a discussion about tone. This was a decision taking shape. Meghan looked at William and asked why the palace always turned pain into procedure. Her words were sharp, but the hurt beneath them was sharper. She said exclusion had followed her for years, first through distance, then through silence, and now through official records. The prince listened without flinching. That restraint made him seem colder, not calmer. He told her the monarchy could not survive if private access was treated as personal entitlement. He said trust had to mean something, or the whole system meant nothing. Meghan pushed back with force. She argued that the palace used rules when it wanted punishment, and used family when it wanted silence. For one brief moment, her composure cracked. She realized William had not come to threaten action. He had come after action had already begun. The records file was not a prop. It was the proof. The prince had moved beyond warning, beyond appeal. beyond the old habit of giving painful situations one more chance. William then revealed the detail that changed the room. The breach was linked directly to Meghan's active ceremonial listing, the internal palace entry that still gave the system a trace of old recognition. That meant the machinery still treated her as someone with a level of access the family no longer trusted. Meghan went quiet. She asked whether Charles had approved it. The prince paused, and that pause answered before his voice did. The king knew, but William moved first. The silence that followed was brutal. Meghan saw the future king in front of her, not the brother-in-law from a fractured past. William saw a boundary he could no longer soften. He closed the file, and the sound felt final. The argument ended in one room, but the authority behind William's decision reached far beyond that door. A monarchy does not erase a name with shouting. It does it with signatures, classifications, archived permissions, and quiet instructions sent through corridors where no one speaks too loudly. That is what made this moment so devastating. Meghan was not being attacked in public. She was being repositioned in private. And William understood that the coldest decisions in royal life are often the most permanent. William left the confrontation knowing the file would now move through the machinery of the crown. Royal records, the palace system that keeps formal references, invitations, access notes, and historic family entries in order, are layered for a reason. One category may look harmless from the outside, but inside the palace, it decides who receives notice, who gets access, and who remains inside the old circle of recognition. The prince targeted Meghan's active ceremonial and household-linked entries, shifting her from recognized access status to historical family reference. Charles read the legal summary without speaking. The king removed his glasses and placed them beside the page, as if the paper had taken something out of him. He understood why the change mattered. Public references could remain polite, but internal privileges were different. If Meghan's name stayed active after a confirmed breach, the palace would be admitting that old family pain could outrank present security. The monarch had delayed painful decisions before. Now his son was making one in his place. Catherine watched William return from the records meeting, and she saw no victory in him. The princess had seen that look before, the quiet weight that came when duty demanded something the heart resisted. He did not celebrate Meghan's removal. He did not speak as though a battle had been won. Catherine understood the deeper wound. The future king had protected the institution, but he had also helped close a door that once led to family. The palace secretary warned William through a sealed administrative note that removal from one category could trigger changes across future seating plans, memorial attendance lists, and restricted correspondence routes. A palace secretary is the senior official who carries royal decisions through the household system, and this warning mattered because records do not sit still once changed. They ripple. One quiet instruction can alter 10 future doors. Then came the final note. The breach review found no justification for maintaining Meghan's former access classification. The sentence was short. The consequence was enormous. William read it once and understood that the palace had crossed from correction into removal. What began as a hidden records change soon became something Meghan could feel in the real world. The first consequence did not arrive as a headline. It arrived as a refusal. A request was made, a name was checked, and a pause followed on the other end of the line. In that pause, the new reality became clear. Meghan had not merely been corrected, she had been removed from a living system of royal recognition, and the palace no longer moved around her as it once had. Meghan's team contacted the palace to confirm attendance protocol for an upcoming family-linked commemorative event. Attendance protocol means the formal steps that decide who may attend, how they are listed, and which route their request must follow. For years, even strained ties had left a thin thread of royal recognition in place. That thread now snapped. The response came back short and polished. All future access must be handled through external guest channels, not family-linked internal routes. Meghan read the message once and did not speak. She placed the phone face down, as if the screen itself had become unbearable. Anger rose first, sharp and familiar, but then something quieter broke through. Hurt. The kind that comes when a person realizes the door was not just closed for today, it had been removed from the wall. Meghan had expected resistance. She had expected coldness. She had not expected to feel erased by a sentence. Harry stepped into the fallout with his own fear showing. He asked whether there was still a path back, whether William had left any room for repair, whether Charles would soften the impact once the first shock passed. Meghan answered before the hope could grow. She said the palace had chosen humiliation over reconciliation. Harry heard the pain beneath her defiance, and he knew this was not only about records. It was about belonging. The change reached further than one event. Invitations, archive requests, memorial notices, and palace communication pathways all shifted around Meghan's name. Archive requests are formal requests to view protected royal materials, and those requests matter because they show who the institution still trusts near private family history. A courtier later revealed through a documented staff account that the most sensitive change was not her public description. It was her removal from the internal automatic courtesy list. That list had carried quiet power. It allowed names to move through certain palace checks without starting from zero each time. Meghan no longer moved that way. Every request would now begin outside the trusted circle. Every answer would remind her of the same truth. After the first door failed to open, the next door closed behind two people who had no aides left to protect them from the truth. The turning point did not come in public. It came in a private conversation between a king and his heir, with no secretary taking notes and no advisor shaping the words. Charles did not demand that William reverse the order. William did not ask for praise. They sat across from each other as father and son, both understanding that monarchy had once again taken something personal and made it official. Charles asked William to meet after the first wave of fallout reached the family. The king wanted to know what the removal truly meant, not in palace language, but in human terms. Was it discipline? Was it protection? Or was it final separation wearing the mask of procedure? The prince answered carefully. He said the monarchy could not rebuild trust, while old access privileges remained open after a confirmed breach. Access privileges are special permissions that allow certain people to move through palace systems more easily, and that mattered because one old permission had already become the doorway to crisis. William did not sound proud. He sounded tired. The future king told Charles he had not wanted to remove Meghan from the active records, but he could not allow the next royal household to inherit unresolved vulnerabilities. He said every future decision would be weaker if this one was softened. The prince understood the pain attached to Meghan's name, and he understood Harry would feel the blow as well. But he also understood that a monarchy cannot protect itself by pretending broken trust is still intact. Charles lowered his eyes before answering. Then the king admitted what William already suspected. Previous warnings had been discussed, delayed, and buried, under the hope that time would calm everything. He revealed this through a private recorded conversation, kept for the household archive, making clear that earlier advisors had warned about unfinished access pathways, but no full correction had followed. The confession landed heavily. William heard regret in his father's voice, but he also heard relief. Charles had delayed the decision. His son had carried it out. The room grew painfully quiet. William was no longer asking permission, and Charles was no longer able to hide behind delay. The king gave his approval without celebration. He said the monarchy must now stand behind the consequence it had chosen. That sentence changed the weight of everything. Meghan's removal was no longer only William's action. It had become the position of the crown. Charles looked at his son and saw the heir becoming harder because history had forced him to be. William looked back and understood that the cost would not disappear. The family had reached its private verdict, but outside the gates, the world was ready to turn that verdict into spectacle. By morning, the private removal had become a national shock. The palace had tried to keep the language cold, but the country heard something warmer and more painful underneath it. A family bond had been formally downgraded. Across breakfast tables, television studios, and crowds near palace gates, the same image took hold. Meghan had not simply lost access, she had lost recognition. William watched the morning coverage without speaking. The palace confirmation had been carefully shaped, each word chosen to sound firm without sounding cruel. It stated that Meghan's internal ceremonial status had been revised following a protocol review. Internal ceremonial status means the private palace category that helps decide how a person is handled for formal family events, invitations, and recognition. That mattered because it was not a public insult. It was a private downgrade that had become impossible to hide. Catherine stood near him and understood the wound behind the silence. The princess knew William had not acted for applause. He had acted because leaving Meghan's old status untouched would make the confirmed breach look survivable without consequence. Still, Catherine could see what the decision had done to him. The future king had protected the palace, but protection had come with a human cost. William kept his eyes on the screen, yet his face showed no triumph. Meghan saw the same coverage from far away, and the humiliation hardened into defiance. She had expected palace language to be cold, but she had not expected the public framing to move so quickly beyond her control. Broadcasters called it one of the sharpest internal royal consequences since the family's modern fractures began. Meghan listened as strangers explained her place inside a family she had once entered with hope, and every sentence made the distance feel more permanent. Then came the front page that captured everything. A London newspaper printed an empty gilded nameplate beneath the headline, "Removed from the Royal Record." The image spread because it said what palace language tried to soften. Meghan's name had not been shouted out of the monarchy. It had been quietly lifted from a place of trust. Outside Buckingham Palace, people gathered near the railings while one broadcaster called the move a symbolic closing of the palace ledger. The phrase struck hard. A palace ledger is the record of names, roles, and formal recognition kept inside royal administration, and this one now carried a brutal message. William had drawn the line. Catherine had seen the pain. Meghan had felt the public sting. When the cameras moved on and the crowds thinned, the meaning of William's decision stood alone, stripped of noise, spin, and spectacle. In the end, the removal was not just about Meghan. It was about the boundary between family and monarchy, between forgiveness and access, between pain and protection. William's decision did not heal the royal wound, but it defined it. For the first time, the palace made clear that emotional history could no longer override institutional trust. And that clarity changed everyone. William stood with the signed records order in front of him, knowing the choice could not be softened anymore. The active ceremonial and household-linked royal records tied to Meghan would remain removed, placing her in a historical family category instead of a trusted operational one. A historical family category means the palace still recognizes a person's past connection to the royal family, but no longer treats that person as someone with active access, automatic invitations, or internal trust. That difference mattered, because it changed her place from living participation to formal memory. Meghan understood the message without needing anyone to explain it twice. The palace had not simply corrected a file, it had drawn a line around her place in royal history. She could still be spoken of, she could still be remembered, but she would no longer move through the private system with old recognition attached. Meghan's emotional verdict was loss wrapped in defiance, because the decision confirmed what she feared most. The palace had turned distance into structure. Charles gave the decision its final weight by refusing to reverse it. The king recognized that the future crown, meaning the authority and duty William would one day inherit, had to be protected by the future king himself. Charles knew the confirmed protocol breach had become the final proof that old access arrangements could not survive inside a modern, security-conscious royal household. He had hoped time might soften the damage. Instead, time had exposed the weakness. Catherine became the quiet measure of what the decision truly cost. The princess watched William place the signed order into a closed folder, and she saw no pride in him. She saw sadness. She saw resolve. She saw the moment a reluctant prince became something harder, sharper, and more prepared for the throne. Catherine understood that William had not chosen cruelty. He had chosen control, because the alternative was letting the next chapter of monarchy begin with an unlocked door. William accepted the burden without celebration. He knew Meghan would carry the wound. He knew Harry would feel the insult. He knew Charles would live with the regret of waiting too long. But the prince also knew that a monarchy cannot survive on half-trust, half-rules, and half-closed doors. The palace emerged colder, firmer, and more disciplined. Meghan emerged marked by a loss of formal trust. William emerged burdened but strengthened. This was the moment the palace chose order over sentiment, and the choice left a permanent mark. Meghan outside the trusted circle, William at the center of command, and the monarchy moving forward, with its doors finally, deliberately closed. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.